Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and the chattering teacup sends her regards. She's still working on her health. We keep our fingers crossed that she will be better after her stay at the health resort. And it is not just me, but a guest from across the pond, author Terry Mark. Hello, Terry, and welcome at Book Lovers Companion.
Greetings and salutations, and thank you for having me.
Splendid to have you on. Before we started the recording, you said you have been to Vienna?
Yes, well, as a very young man, I had spent several years in military school in Germany, West Germany at the time, of course, and then after I graduated, I took a trip around Europe and Vienna and then did some Switzerland, and where I learned I really cannot ski, and I made it as far as in Vienna with and I wanted to ride the gondola, and that's just a cesspool of people trying to get you to buy things, which made the experience. I've done that. It's like jumping out of an airplane. I don't want to do that again. And yeah, and I had fabulous food, and I enjoyed it very much. And maybe someday my wife and I will go back, and we'd love to see, Pompeii and Rome and the Vatican and some of those other places. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed Europe very much.
And you enjoy history. Like we said before we started the recording, you're a history buff, and it features greatly in your books. And Terry, what can you tell our listeners about your Wim Hof Chronicles?
Well, it's a combination of the motto is steampunk history monsters. So what my goal has been to bring out details of the 19th century, the 20th century events that I'm familiar with, that I know to go and research, that seemed rather large epics, and bring out and bring forth the historical, fictional characters of the monsters, the vampires, the werewolves, the zombies, those kinds of things. If I had another one to do, it would be mummies. Well, not mummies, but what would someone ask? Someone asked me if I had to do one, it would be the Revolutionary War, and it would be Benjamin Franklin going up the Grand Canyon and finding a UFO and Bigfoot, for instance. Right? It's that kind of a combination of historical characters and things like that. And when you get into doing something like that, that's simply a proposal idea that I had, but I don't know how well it would work. But once I came up with it, within a couple of months, there were some articles in the paper, in the news, about they found they were looking under Benjamin Franklin's home in London, and they found the bones of lots and lots of bodies, which one leads to, of course, the obvious answer is because he was doing, wanting to do research. But when in actuality, you could say, well, maybe he was, a serial killer, right? So you could take lots of things in a direction. When you walk through step by step, you find there are things that occur that are like, my goodness, I had no idea, and use them, and they, and that's the fun I had. There were several, if you walk through the first one and then the second one, there are things that you come across which I didn't know when I started out. Right? I didn't know the character that they would come across in Kansas City in the right, and in the Opera House. I don't know if you read that part in the Opera House. There's a historical character that appears in the Opera House, which I had no idea of. There are several characters that appeared that I found when writing the second book, right, that I had no idea of. there are scenes from the third, from Moonlight Serenade, where I did research and discovered the backgrounds of Glenn Miller being,
Hmm.
possibly, in psychological operations, and a part of Operation Paperclip, which was to bring the German scientists and generals over. And he was very popular when they were interviewing in World War II, the bomber pilots, they would, and the people in the bombers going over London, they would say, "What were you doing?" And they would often say, "We were listening to Glenn Miller." So it became a very useful tool. Once you do enough research, then, you things connect.
Hmm.
So that's really what, where my history, research and so forth comes. I'm a I mean, my background is very varied, but it's because I'm kind of an autodidact. I'm not really well taught in a classroom. When I get into a job and they want to go, okay, we're going to bring everybody in and sit you all down, and first thing I do is pull somebody aside and say, you know what, that's not going to that doesn't work for me, right? It just doesn't. As a person who's gone through lots of schooling, I know um, it's auditory. First of all, it's hearing and it's doing. And so when I get into something, I absorb it. Whether it's politics or, internet programming or whatever it is, or historical details, um, they're all something that you can just continually peel back layers of.
Hmm.
So that's where it comes from.
Interesting. And this interest, you already said it's steampunk history monsters. So steampunk. I had some authors who wrote steampunk on the show, and I always wonder what and why. Why the interest in this very niche genre, although very, very popular?
Right. Well, I would say it may seem niche, but in fact, when I tell people what is or isn't, what they think about, what the deal is with steampunk and explaining steampunk, I say, well, have you watched the first 10 minutes of Star Wars? The first 10 minutes of Star Wars is on Tatooine in the middle of nowhere. I mean, the hovercraft, and you got the lightsabers. You don't really have any heavy mechanical things until, the Millennium Falcon takes off. And there's that empire out there, but you have a life that's very pre, um, you know, uh, the combustion engine, right? I think I like that, because it can help. It puts restraints on the story, because if you're not, within steampunk, you could veer off and things could be, I love reading, David Weber in science fiction or other things like that, but you could read those and you veer off into, and it continually the science gets deeper and deeper and more complicated, and you can put guardrails on what you're going to do. Plus, it's got a certain romance to it, you know, flying ships and and simple things, and a simpler life, and that's really, I think, it's just an aesthetic to guide the story, um, because I think you have. If I ask people, well, what specific did you ever see, like the Golden Compass or some other films, and they don't realize that they are in fact steampunk because there's so much going on. Um, so that's that's what I have about steampunk and monsters. I just love, you know.
Interesting that you mentioned the Golden Compass. I mean, I watched the film and I read all the books, which I enjoyed even more. And you're right, I didn't realize, now that you mention it, that it is steampunk.
Yeah, right. And so it's a great story told within the limiting bounds of, passing into one world and in the next, and the technology is all just without the internal combustion engine. And that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. And I said also before we started the recording, I read book 2 in your chronicles, and I found again fascinating the amount of details you put into your book when you wrote about what happened, how these monsters you mentioned acted, where they acted, when you first put them on the scene. It was quite interesting. And also I hope I don't give too much away, and who you put more or less in charge of this kind of force.
Oh, well, I mean that, yeah, well, I was looking for I was looking for, vampires, werewolves, mummies. I was looking for that kind of character, and I might have ended up doing werewolves if the storyline had worked out differently, but and other details. But that wasn't history, and and that character jumped out at me. You mean Frankenstein, right?
Yeah.
Right. And that's, yeah, and that's fine. That's how I pitch. That's how I when I sell my books to people. It's Teddy Roosevelt and Ernest Hemingway against Frankenstein in World War I, and they go, what? So it takes a little bit of explanation. Silesia, part of Austria-Hungary. The whole thing, and I think I'm particularly, you mentioned that, so I think I'm particularly proud of when Teddy Roosevelt sees the soldier dead on the ground and says, "What is this flag?" And then I spend 6 or 7 or 8,000 words going back and going through 3 different events in history and drawing them together and bringing them all through Silesia. Was really something that I didn't really start out doing, but I just started researching all of the history through Silesia, and I went, wow, you know, and on and the what I in Bohemia and all of that. It's all of that Central Europe, and it you know and how it figures. And there's all kinds of things that there's more. I'm writing about the 11th century, right? I'm doing a sort of a, a an origin novel of the gunslinger and Frankenstein, um, and I'm going back to the 11th century. So there's lots of I had to read the Canterbury Tales, and yeah, and learn and differentiate and learn about the Vikings, and and it's just fascinating when you try to present that to people. And there's all kinds of the more I do that, the more I realize how if I contrast it to anything in current events, and this is where we veer off for moments, but I'll just do it real briefly. Is there were several readers who had quite a bit of a problem with when I spent quite a bit of time in Dublin, where the Vikings that was the large Viking camp, and in 1000 AD. And I spent quite a bit of time there, and part of what was going on at the time was that the Vikings and the Norsemen were becoming Christian. But at the same time, they were also getting in their boats and going down to England, and to going to the coasts of England and raiding monasteries which had wealth. And people said, well, there's a kind of a disconnect there. And I said, well, and I didn't really know how to answer, because I'm not always that great with you don't get it. They still, it's not, it doesn't happen one day that you're this, and the next day you're that. It's a transition, right? There may have still been some who didn't accept the Christian faith. They still had pressure to go and bring gold back, for the purposes of becoming more famous and powerful and things like that. They still had to have a place to go to do the things that they've done for centuries before. So change didn't happen overnight. So, and that's, I think I would say that's often what I reflect on if I'm particularly if I'm looking at what the response of the popular culture, oftentimes it acts as if one day something happens and next day something is different and everything should change. So, yeah.
And I suppose you also immersed yourself very deeply in military history because your description of the different battalions that were used, and I have to admit, I Googled quite a little bit while reading your book as well. And I mean, of course, you know the names as an Austrian of the Hussars and the Uhlans and so on, but I couldn't remember what the uniforms looked like and so on. And I found most interesting also your description of this battalion that had wings. Oh,
The winged
artificial
stars.
wings. Yes. And that reminded me of the siege of Vienna during the Ottoman Empire, the second one, when the Poles uh liberated Vienna and they came supposedly had those wings on their backs and this noise that those wings made.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one recorded as one of the most lopsided victories in history.
Yeah.
It was I don't know, it was a few thousand winged hussars against 100,000, Ottoman Turks,
Yeah.
and they rode through and split them up and dispersed them and drove them off because they didn't know what they were looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought, and I thought, one correct. I went back and I just researched as much history as I could. And when I came across something like that, I was like, wow, that I got to use that. Or the um, the Austrian um, the Austrian air gun.
Hmm.
When which was not popular used, but it was not it was not the bullet was not driven by gunpowder from the striking. It was driven by compressed air. And they had some very good success with it. Or they just didn't, distribute it or manufacture it widely. I thought that was a fascinating piece of military equipment, and some other things that I used in the book. I tried to, use as pieces.
Yeah, so that was splendid because there was a lot of innovation, wasn't there, shortly before and during the First World War.
Right. Yeah. Lots of, again, the combustion engine was just starting to come online. There were just starting to be vehicles. But, yeah, but Teddy Roosevelt was still running around on horses or camels, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
So,
found it also fascinating like you said before, the characters you use. I mean, it's always fun to have those historic characters and play with them. As a fiction author, you have so much freedom. And what drew you to those characters you used in your books? What was it that drew you to, let's say, Hemingway and Roosevelt, and in the first book, others like Tesla and then Amelia Earhart?
right. I think once, I mean, everyone knows Hemingway as the elder writer and so forth, and Papa Hemingway and so forth. But when I went back and I read, I don't know if I have them here. I went back and I read all of Hemingway's diaries from when he was from the age of 17 to 20 or 21. I found them fascinating. I mean, and there, and I have people who were diehard Hemingway fans. I have one gentleman who was reading some of the work, came back to me and said he never called himself the great Hemingstein. I said, yes, he did. It's right in his diary. And this is a gentleman. This is a gentleman who grew up in Oak Park and went to a high school. And his English teacher, the first year she taught Hemingway, and the last year she taught him in high school English. So he took his background of Hemingway very seriously. And I had to bring out the books and say this is the letters that he wrote back home. And I found that greatly, again, it's one of those things when you delve into deeper, you realize you peel back layers that are out there for people. If you just go and read it, go and find that information, it's there. That he regarded himself as kind of that, and really tried to, um, well, the both of them. And I was really happy to find that about Hemingway, because uh, uh, that I was able to use to work both of them in writing, in that I wrote kind of diaries in both of their sections. And like when he was stuck out in the middle of the desert and wrote himself a letter home, if he's never going to find, if you find it, or whatever, and used a lot of the same kind of dark humor that Hemingway was known for as a kid, and so forth, and some of the expressions like his grandmother's shoes and other things like that he used. Um, yeah, he was that they just. I think the reason that I used them was because there was just so much there to find. There was just so much there to use.
Hmm. Absolutely. And what about these other figures? In the book 3 and 4, you have a figure. You play with that figure, although history says
Ida
otherwise.
Tarbell. You mean Anne Frank? Yes, Anne Frank. Well, I really, you know, there. The thing is that the woman who goes has been, and a few years ago she was talking here in Colorado, about, as a Holocaust survivor. And if you look into the research and other things like that, you find that very oftentimes the girl herself, they had a hard time telling the difference between her and Amelia, and or it was her cousin, between Amelia and her cousin. And so I just said, I'll just use that. We'll just wedge the girl in. She needs a place to stay, and Amelia will run off and become a French partisan. And I thought, it's not as unlikely as it sounds, although she was a little young, obviously. Um, but I enjoyed, um, but I couldn't not use it once I once I stumbled on that Amelia became Kitty, and then she began having arguments with herself. I really don't want to do this. Shut up, Anne. Kitty, we really shouldn't be doing this. No, we'll be fine, Anne. You got to be stronger. And Kitty became strong, and there was kind of a split in a personality, right? And once I had that, and I realized, that Anne would be the perfect one to always be concerned about others, always be wanting to help other people. Um, it was, she was a great character, you know.
Another thing in the book that was fascinating was, we are talking about, they are heading south because there was this problem with Mexico and this Pancho revolution. And you also inserted the Native Americans in a very plausible way. Because on the one hand, we have this use of myth from the villains, how they dress
Mhm.
up their soldiers. And then we have those who work on the side for the good boys. So Hemingway gets adopted into a tribe, and they help them find their way and to help get rid of the villains, more or less.
Yeah, yeah. And that only came about because of my research into Copper Canyon, which is, as I found, was 4 times the size of the Grand Canyon, and it was amazing. And the more I delved into it, the more the long distance running Indians that were there, that are natives of that area, and trying to find, well, what else might there be out there. Then, a lost Apache tribe didn't seem way out of the bounds in 1917, right? I mean, as I wrote in 1950 or 1952, one of the one of the last remaining members of Geronimo's group said that the Broncos and the were out still out in Copper Canyon and free.
And do I remember correctly that the Navajos or the Apaches, correct me, were used during World War II for coding?
Yes, yeah, yeah. That's the Apaches were used as no, you're right. It was the Navajos. It was the Navajos, and the Navajo code. Yeah, and it was all because what yeah, however that they would talk to, the eagle would be the plane, say, and the horse would be, and so forth, and that and the yeah, and the Japanese could not understand what they were saying, even if they could break the code. Right? I have no idea what he's saying. It was just gibberish.
Yeah, nonsense for them.
Right? Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
and I had no idea that all our troops were down there on the border.
Mm.
And when I started the novel, I had no idea that they were all out down there chasing around Pancho Villa and things. It only came about putting it all together.
And I admit, dear listeners, also looked that one up because I thought, yeah, I've heard the name, but what is it all about? I mean, you mentioned it briefly, what was going on, and I said, okay, I have to look that up as well. I have to look that up as well. I mean, like one of your reviewers on Amazon said, oh, I googled a lot. Yeah, so did I.
Yeah, and that's why when bookstores or libraries want to tend to put it in the young adult section, I say, well, maybe you should read it first. I would say maybe they have the capability of reading it, but they really don't have the ability to understand, to comprehend it, all the comprehension that is necessary, right? I mean, uh, but I come from an age of, from like 4 or 5, but I was already reading on my own, but I would say, "What's this?" And my mother would say, "Go look it up." Right? So, I don't know if they do that today. They don't seem to do that much today. They like it easier.
Which is astounding, isn't it? Because it's only just the swipe of a finger away. I mean, you had to go to the living room or to the library and find a book. These days, all you need is a mobile phone.
Right.
And yet they don't.
And they still don't do it. Right.
Which is, I also wanted to ask you that because when I looked through Amazon again on your page, and it always says 12 to 18 years, young adult fiction. But when I read it, like you said, I felt it's not really that age group.
No, it isn't. I mean, you have to put it down. I mean, I could put it just as 18, but then it's not, I'm I don't know. I'm not necessarily putting it 12 to 8. Does it say that specifically like that on Amazon that it was
Well,
12 to 18?
yeah, well, at least on German Amazon, it
Okay.
says
Well,
book 2, 12 to 18. I'm not sure what it says for the others. Well, let me look very quickly. It says 11 to 18, book number 3. So
well,
probably.
then I maybe I need to go back in and change the age, but I don't, at some point that may be what I can do. But yeah, that's in other words, I think that Amazon asked me what's the minimum age that you should read it at. And I said probably 12. And because I have people who come, when I sell the book, they come to me and say, what's, I'd love these look, I would love to have my son or my daughter read these. I said, well, I don't recommend, and if they're a precocious one, maybe 12, but generally about 15 years old is what I recommend. And I think 18, it just represents an adult, right? Anybody upwards. They didn't give me an option to say set the uppermost limit of age, like 55 or something, right? They didn't say if you're 50, if you're going to be 70, you're not going to like this book. I think anyone could, right? So you got to be.
Yeah. I mean, coming back to the steampunk part, is there a lively steampunk writing community out there?
Well, I enough, yeah, that I'm going to be in September. I'm going to be going to a steampunk convention been held every year in a place called Victor, Colorado. It looks like if you Google Victor, Colorado, you will see some of the pictures from town, and one of them is an enormous mural of Nikola Tesla on one
Hmm.
of the walls. He's got quite a bit of history going through there. I don't know, that was one of the places where he did some experiments. Obviously, Colorado Springs. It's not far from Colorado Springs, where he had his tower and a lot of some of that other experimentation that he was doing.
Hmm. And do you think that steampunk as a genre is also more versatile, let's say, like compared to crime fiction? Because I always think that crime fiction is a very versatile genre where you can write history, where you can write cozy, where you can write the most gory things ever imagined. And is it similar with steampunk? Do you think?
Oh yes, I could write about any time period, right, in history and still be steampunk. I'm going to be doing, my next series is going to be a series of steampunk fantasy novels, steampunk fantasy series. Um, and I think you mentioned, mentioned crime fiction, right? I don't, I don't know quite how I would do a steampunk crime fiction, but it's definitely on my list of potential to try and add. I would love to add another besides, historical fiction and fantasy and science fiction and fantasy and something else. Crime fiction being one of them, and because the lines are so close together. They overlap. I mean, it took me a bit of time after finishing the novels and then finally starting to sell them and talk to people and market them, that I thought, well, this is fantasy, right? This is fantasy. But fantasy people came to me and said, no, I wouldn't read this. This is not fantasy. Fantasy is, you know, this us has a system, has a system of how something works, whether it's magic or whether it's alchemy or it's something else. The way the universe works, it has a system in it that isn't you can't find. Now maybe it has dragons and some other things, but not all of them have that, and
Mm.
other things, and maybe and changelings, and not all of them have that, but it's a system. Brandon Sanderson is a good example, right? He has the system, the Mistborn, and the other kinds of books that he does, that sort of cross that line between science fiction and fantasy. And I think you could do the same thing with another genre like crime fiction or something else. You just simply, a little fantasy crime fiction, maybe.
Mm. Probably the world building thing is huge in fantasy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Of- Absolutely.
Yeah. You said you'd be interested in steampunk in combination with crime fiction. I had one guest on the show, T.E. MacArthur. She wrote A Place of Fog and Murder. I think it was her first book in her steampunk series. It's about a lieutenant, a private investigator in the 1930s in San Francisco. And it was a fantastic read.
And what's the title called again?
Uh, A Place of Fog and Murder.
Okay, a
T
place of
E of fog and murder.
fog.
Mhm. She calls
The
it
fog and
Dieselbank. Yeah, it's a special.
yes, that place is yes. Okay.
Yeah, So not really steampunk, more dieselpunk, which was interesting. I said, oh, never heard of that before. So there's also
Well, it's someone wanting to use the combustion engine. Yeah, no, just keep that diesel engine out of it. No, just pull that back.
But it was a good read. I have to say it was an absolutely fantastic read. And like I said, I always like a good story. And you said fantasy, and we said world building, but you have to follow the rules. When you build the world, you have to follow the rules. It has to
Right.
be consistent. So, what about, if there are any rules in steampunk?
Well, the only rules in steampunk are, to me, would be, you know, you could even create electricity by, a water wheel and some other effects, possibly. You can have another method of creating some electricity. But and but I think basically it's the 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 line would be crossed from using a combustion engine. I think, even if, wind power, maybe, but but not solar. That just the technology is the line that you don't cross with steampunk.
Mm.
Now, you could
And
even have a steampunk computer.
okay, interesting.
Yeah, I don't remember where I saw it, but I did come across a steampunk computer. But of course, it would look like um, there was a film about the computer that broke
The Enigma code.
the Enigma code. It was
Yeah,
as big as a
yeah.
room, and all kinds of moving parts and everything. You could conceivably have a kind of a steampunk computer, but I don't know why you need it. So.
Yeah. True. Okay, good point. Yeah. You do have a point there. Absolutely. And writing these chronicles, was it planned right from the start to be a 4-part series? And how did you plan for your books? Are you a planner? Are you a pantser? Are you in the middle? What can you tell us about your writing process?
Well, it starts for me with the simple elevator pitch. With the simple defining the elevator pitch. Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison are in the Old West being chased by a vampire gunslinger who's afraid electricity will kill the night. Now, how it gets going from there is really dependent upon the research, because then I went back all the way back, and before Edison, Tesla met Edison and was working for Edison, where he started in Paris, right? And then brought him forward. And that sort of gave me the idea of where to start with the gunslinger as well. Sort of an international, suave kind of guy, an internal daywalker kind of thing. And moving, and then bringing it forward. And where do I go next? Well, then I went to New York, and then finding out all of the things that happened in New York, and who was there, and the other authors, and Mark Twain, and so forth. And then getting to figuring out how to get to Chicago. Well, then I've got to understand I've got to understand all of the train, and how the trains run, and what all the technology was at the time of the trains, and how they were continuing to get faster, and what was going on that time. And all of I had to, I for that book, I went to Chicago, right? I went, and then I went to Telluride, right, for days, and walked up to the mouth of the mine in Telluride, where Tesla had been, and it had been, and creating the engine that created the electricity that lit Telluride streetlights, and those kinds of things. it only I guess the answer to your question is no. I don't plan the everything out. I had some kind of idea that I wanted. Now that I was doing the Way of Vampire, I wanted the mummies, and I wanted the werewolves, and I wanted to do that, and that would be at least 3 parts. Um, and that was originally the case. And then when I set out to write the second one, then it was, you know, werewolves just didn't connect well in 19 with World War One, and Frankenstein did, the mummies did. They work really well especially for World War One. All of those details came across in Silesia and World War One, and all of those things happening. It stood out like a spotlight. And then and then World War Two was, I mean, it kind of, when you kind of say it, Amelia Earhart, Anne Frank, Paul Newman, and Glenn Miller against werewolves and Nazis. People go, what kind of drugs did you take when you were young? And to me, that just stands out, right? And so it was fun. And I did not originally it was going to be 3 books, and it just my concept of how the book went, it would have meant the third book would have been really, really large. I mean, it really is 2 parts, right? Um and it was meant to be, the first part, and then the second part would be all steampunk, because that's the society where they find is all kind of steampunkish. But it just didn't work. That I really felt like the book deserved its own story, its own piece, and then bringing out the second novel and allowing bringing in people right from the beginning, and giving it, and saying this is, a sort of a new adventure, really seemed to be, it just seemed to work from the time that the plane took off from France, and went out over the Atlantic, and then and picking up right from there seemed like a great part 2.
Hmm. I mean, it was definitely something new for me as well, because when I started reading your book, I thought, okay, here we have zombies. Then I realized it's not really zombies. What we have here, what do we have here? And then I came across in the book for reading for Ron, Victor Frankenstein. And said, that's what we have. And going further and further, chapter by chapter, interlude by interlude, one realizes, even to that point, it's not just Victor Frankenstein. It's more than just Victor Frankenstein, what we have here. There is something else in the mix of what is going on and what is happening. And that was absolutely fascinating to find out and realize. And also when Roosevelt and the others, they are not completely sure what is going on and what is happening and what is the source of all this. And it takes us until the end of book 2 for them to see, there is this certain something that is going on, and power has been harnessed, which we didn't know before.
Right. Yeah. And I tried to allude a little bit to it in the first book of how the vampire talks about the night and his creation and things like that. But yeah, then but I brought it forth fully, and I think that's when things started to really flesh out and crystallize for me, as far as, okay, now I've created, I created something. Now I can say what the Vim is. I can, because originally the Vim was just me, being trying to be too clever by half, because Vim is just Vim, vigor, energy, steam. It's just and then hood is just another, word for punk. It's just another word for steampunk, Vim hood. But it turned into where the Vim was a much more central piece of what was going on. And I think that really was important for me as far as, uh, and I really had to talk with other authors about what to do about it, and how to use it. And again, it was just a matter of research. It's not just something I'm just going to just run with. It came about and blossomed because of alchemy, because of other things, and what would and what, and quantum physics, and so forth.
Mm.
So
Mm. You said you had to talk to other authors. Is it important then not just talking to other authors, but also have people who read through the book, through the manuscript, and say, "Okay, we get it. What you're trying to show us?"
well, so my philosophy is don't write alone. That's a philosophy that I've developed over the last decade. I have a regular writers group that meets
Mm.
on Zoom, and I have people from Texas, Indiana, Missouri, California, here in Colorado, and we meet and we get together and we read 1,500 to 2,000 words of each other's writing. Someone else reads it out loud, and then people give their feedback. And I found that was really a revelatory, really an eye opening thing. But I kind of knew it. I kind of experienced it in school when doing speech writing, because words that you write down are very different when you have to say them out loud, and they can have a different how you pattern them, how you put your sentences together can sound very different out loud. So it really was an interesting, learning experience, and it shaped my writing. And so, yeah, I think I don't have a lot of success, and I think that that's a burden to ask other people to. Here's my book. Would you read it and tell me what you think? I'm okay with giving you 1,500 or 2,000 words if I'm reading your 1,500 or 2,000
Mm.
words, and doing that on a regular basis. Especially, it's a give and take kind of thing. So on the one hand, no, I don't find that there's a lot of people that I just hand the book off to and say, "Would you tell me what you think?" I mean, if someone did that, I might really, really like them, and I don't know how many weeks or months it would be before I finish the book. I mean, I've got several books I'm working on already. You have to be on, and there's a lot, and there's reasons for that. I think that, we're considerably more and more busy as we, in this age, and and I can't think of where what my point was. Well, yeah, it's so busy. I mean, Audible. It's why audiobooks are so popular.
Mm.
And,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely, I agree. So the next question would be then, what is your advice for other authors?
Don't write alone. Find a group of people, and stick with it. Try to build a group of other authors who are working on their own skills and want to write, hopefully several books, have some ideas in mind, and get them together. And if you get them together, and then the next step is as you go forward in that, and how do you help each other sell your books, right? Just the other weekend, we had a book fair about 30 minutes away from here, where 7 or 8 authors turned out. Now, the turnout wasn't great, but I was stoked. I was just pleased just to have 7 or 8 authors show up at once. And that just as an author, a lot that could be difficult.
Yeah.
Um, I have another situation where there's a studio, an artist studio, and they often will put up, people come in and bring in there's one that had, for instance, all of her steampunk stuff, and then somebody else does little statues and other things, and somebody else does rugs and things like that, right? And there she said you can have an area for a bookshelf. So I got 8 or 9 authors together, and we're going to have a bookshelf with authors with our books, so people can look in. So I think once you've developed a relationship with other authors and you're helping each other write, then helping each other sell is also the next step. So I would just say don't write alone.
Mhm. Splendid. You have touched a teeny tiny bit on your future plans. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's coming next?
Well, a little bit. So I'm just nearly finished with the origin novel of, I'm calling it The Black Prince. And it is the origin of the gunslinger and Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, how they come across the Vim to begin with, how the gunslinger becomes cursed with it, and so he's kind of undying, and how Victor Frankenstein comes across having the Vim to begin with, and what he's doing with it, and that takes place in the 11th century. A lot of that in the 11th century, and it will be cast back to a lot of it is well, I'm getting close to where it's going to be cast back to Bohemia and Silesia again. Um, and then I've been putting together the ideas in my head for and the characters in my head for the start of the fantasy series. Um, the one that I'm working with right now is is Serpent Sails and Bloodthorns, and it will and I'm rather excited to about it. I'm always it's always a search and a consuming of information and figuring out and looking at this and looking at that piece and wondering out what works and what doesn't. Um, and and I don't. So I was reading about the movie Twister, and the actor who died a few years ago, Bill Paxton, was in it, and he had. I read how he had pitched a sequel to Twister, not the one that they hate, but he said, "What I want to do is I want to I want to present Twister, the tornado point of view, like Jaws. Where Jaws, you follow Jaws going through the ocean and grabbing people, and you have the eyes of the Jaws. Then you have the point of view of the Twister. Instead of people going, "Oh my God, there's the Twister," and getting sucked in, it's the Twisters looking and going, "I'm going to grab that, I'm going to grab that barn. I'm going to grab that house. I'm going to, and I thought, what, you're right. So probably whatever I decide to do with the villain or the serpent or the whatever it is will probably be from the point of like a Jaws point of view. We will be in his head, wandering around and confused as hell because why is he in this fantasy when he should be in the ocean or wherever he's been brought from. He will be confused.
Okay.
So
And it's in any way, anyway, it's back to a lot of research, Central Europe.
Central Europe, yes. Otto the Third, the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor. Yes, lots of things. I did not know that he used Vikings for his bodyguards. Lots of things to found that I found. Lots of things that will be very fun and very interesting to read.
Mm-hmm. And that calls for another trip to Central Europe.
Maybe I can get my wife to do that. Yeah, I would love to. I'd love to show her. I would love to show her Austria. Yes, and Switzerland. I would love to show her. Yeah, it was a beautiful country.
Yeah, something to put on your list.
I put on the list. Yes.
Splendid. Terry, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Um, Kill the Night is on Amazon and is also available on Audible. And The Sun Goeth Down, which is the second one, Teddy Roosevelt and Ernest Hemingway meet Frankenstein in World War One, should be on Audible in a matter of weeks.
Splendid. Terry, it was such fun talking to you.
The same to you. I really enjoyed it. Really, and I hope that what was her name?
Edith Zeitelberger.
Yeah, your name. Yeah, your name is Edith. But who's sick?
Oh, the chattering teacup.
The chattering teacup. Right. Yeah. I hope the chattering teacup as well.
Oh, yeah, she will be again. Because, it's her back killing her and her shoulders are killing her because, working on a computer every day, the day jobs, they are horrible.
I wish I could show you I have 4 computer monitors in front of me.
Yeah, that's a little bit how that works as a bookkeeper, Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Terry, wait for me in the green room. I will be with you shortly.
Okay.
Don't go away.
I will meet you there.
Yeah. Dear listeners, we do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we hope to see you again at another episode of Book Lovers Companion. Until next time.